St. Lucia is a small island in the Caribbean. About half of its 100,000 people are affected by a disease called schistosomiasis. Schistosomiasis, or bilharzia as it is sometimes called, is a common disease in many tropical countries. More than 200 million people living in Japan, China, the Philippines, the Middle East, Africa, South America, and the Caribbean are probably infected with schistosomiasis. A campaign in St. Lucia against schistosomiasis is being conducted jointly by the Rockefeller Foundation and the island's government. The director of the project is a British physician, Dr. Peter Jordan, who is a world authority on schistosomiasis.
The island is very mountainous and rugged, and there are many valleys. And these provide ideal conditions for comparing different control schemes. A person infected with Schistosoma mansoni will excrete the eggs of the parasite in his stool. Many of these people probably do not know they have the infection, or if they know they have it, they are not troubled by it very much. On the other hand, many of them are being debilitated by it. Some of them develop severe disease from the infection. They may develop large livers, large spleens, and complications of these developments can be fatal. In many of the countries where bilharzia is common, sanitary facilities are very poor, and not infrequently fecal contamination will get into water, into ponds, streams, and rivers, which are used for domestic water supplies and for agricultural practices. In the water, the schistosome eggs hatch, and a small organism called Miracidia emerges. This swims around in the water, and if it comes in contact with a snail of the right species, it penetrates the snail and develops in it. After about 4 weeks, the snail will shed many thousands of cercariae, or larvae. And these swim around in the water, and if they come in contact with anybody, they are able to penetrate the unbroken skin of the person. After penetrating the skin, they gradually develop into adult worms, which live in the blood vessels around the intestines. In this island, we have selected 2 valleys. One, cul-de-sac valley, where we are attempting to control the spread of schistosomiasis by killing the snails. In a second valley, Richefond, we are putting in water supplies so that there is no need for the local population to go into the infected rivers and streams.
We can say that the biological section's interest in cul-de-sac valley is to try and interrupt transmission by attacking the snail. Now, before we can get onto molluscociding, or before we could get onto molluscociding, we had to go into quite a lot of detail finding out about the snails, where they lived, and whether they were always in the same place throughout the year, or whether they shifted from one site to another.
Dr. Starrock, our senior biologist, is in charge of all biological investigations. Before coming to St. Lucia, he served in Tanzania for 5 years, where he had great experience with both the intermediate hosts of Schistosoma mansoni and Schistosoma hematobium.
Sampling the marshes presents a problem because they're so big that we can't sample the entire area. So what we do is mark off a series of positions with stakes. Then the collector moves in with a quadrat square, and using a scoop he searches right through the area within the square. In sampling streams, we mark off a selected length, searching first down one side and then back along the other for a fixed period of time. The banana drains we had to deal with in a different way. So what we did here was we used a special sampler which took a plug of mud out of the banana drain bottom. Having collected the samples in the field, they're then brought back to the laboratory.
What condition is sacked?
Clear water.
Clear, yes.
Both side and inside vegetation.
Yes.
Dashing plant all around.
Did you see many snails around?
Yes, sir. Quite a few.
Thank you. Next man.
The problem is to separate the snails from the mud. To help the separation process, a battery of sieves is agitated in a larger volume of water, and it's then comparatively easy to separate the snails from the remaining mud particles. Then we went through the next stage, which was to measure every snail and record its diameter. The snails are placed in small tubes of water under lights in the laboratory. 24 hours later, we examine the snails, and it's possible to see the infective larvae of the parasite swimming in the water. One thing we want to find out is just how dangerous are the natural waters. In other words, do they contain the infective larvae or cercariae of the parasite or not? A system that's been used is to expose white mice in these water bodies. The white mouse will become infected with the parasite if it's exposed to it, and can be examined about 6 to 8 weeks later to see if there are any adult worms developed. The mice are taken out to the particular field site, and usually we use a wooden raft to hold them in position, and then the individual mouse cages are taken out and placed carefully in this raft. The mice are left in the water for an hour and then removed, put into the box, which is returned to the laboratory. In trying to decide whether the waters were dangerous or not, and infected with bilharzia, that is, we used a technique known as cercariometry. This, very simply, is a method of taking a sample of water and filtering it to see if we trap any of the infective agents, cercaria, on the filter. This filter paper is then stained with iodine, which both kills the parasites and also shows them up so that they can be seen when you examine the paper under a microscope. The object of this exercise is to give the team leaders experience... Okay, start your spray teams. Is to give the team leaders experience in controlling their teams in spraying in banana drains. For this exercise, we don't actually use banana drains, but we're spraying on a piece of flat ground. Each team leader controls 4 sprayers. As they move along, he sets the pace to see that they apply the molluscicide at the right speed. The marshes represent one of the natural habitats for the snails in St. Lucia. These present very difficult conditions to try and kill the snails with a chemical. The teams of sprayers form up close together, rather differently from when they're going through the banana drains, but the principle is the same. Finally, we're left with the flowing water sites to deal with. We set up what's called a drip feed, which is a large plastic bottle full of the concentrated chemical.
So these will be the first drip feeds done. Then the banana drains will be sprayed in the marshes, and then finally the flowing water systems within the banana drains on the valley floor.
Yep.
But I think this whole area will take at least 2 weeks.
Well, we were working out, was this A, B, C, D? Those we reckon 1 day each.
1 day each, yes.
And I think that's optimistic. I think this was based on a 30-acre spraying a day.
Yeah.
Before moving out into the field, it's very important to check that we've got all the apparatus and chemical that we need for the day with us, and to see that this is loaded correctly onto the truck.
I'd like for a little bit of Francis. Water, all right. 17 months. Yeah. Molluscicide. Huh?
Banana drains are one of the habitats in which we find the snails. The problem with banana drains is that they don't contain flowing water, and therefore, if we want to introduce a chemical to kill the snails, we have to take it to the drains. Now, the process we've worked out to do this is that the team leader marks the beginning of the drains with 2 marks. This has been rehearsed many times before to try and arrange for the sprayman to move along at about the right pace to deliver the right amount of chemical. The way they do this is to chant out numbers, and they take a pace on each number. At this rate, they proceed slowly across the banana drains until they reach some natural landmark. After an area has been sprayed, then another team will move in and take water samples to check that enough chemical got into the drains, and also put in bags of living snails, which are left out for 24 hours. If the right concentration of chemical has been achieved, then these living snails will die. In the field, the 50 cc sample is placed in a small plastic bottle, and then chemical is added which contains a dye. The sample is shaken up, and this is then carefully squeezed out of the bottle into a glass cuvette, which is then placed in a special device where you look through optically and you match the color of the dye with a special graded disc. When you get the two colors matching, you then read off on a scale, and this tells you the concentration of the molluscicide in the field sample. Some of the marshes are more tricky because if you walk into the middle of them, you just sink up to your neck or disappear completely. So this necessitated a different technique. This is where we use a power sprayer. The idea is that this blasts the chemical into the center of the marsh. Spraymen walk around the edge and spray the edge, but the power sprayer blasts into the center. And then as a final backup, we soak food pellets in molluscicide, and someone goes around and throws these right into the center of the marsh, and we hope that the chemical leaches out from that. Snails are also found in streams on St. Lucia. Treating these streams is rather easier than treating banana drains and marshes because the flow of water takes the chemical to the snail. To do this, we place a concentrated solution of the chemical in the plastic bottle. By using about 6 such bottles, one after the other, we hope to get enough chemical into the stream to kill all the snails.
Mr. Dalton, our anthropologist, had worked in Australia, Japan and Guyana. In St. Lucia, he is particularly interested in studying the contact the people in Richmond Valley had with the local waters.
Well, the object of employing a social anthropologist on a project like this is really a result of a recognition of the fact that bilharzia is not just a medical infection, but it is also related to the social environment and the cultural environment, and that this plays a very key role in transmission. I'm primarily concerned with the social aspects of transmission, and obviously the most important part of this is the entry of people into waters and streams in polluted areas. In our observations, we took 7 days a month over a 15-month period, observations of people between the hours of 6 a.m. in the morning and 6 p.m. in the evening, so that we could encompass the entire range of daily activities of the population. Our findings, we're still really analysing these findings statistically, but their impressions of what really took place were as follows. The usual day begins with small children coming down to the river with buckets of water. They collect the water and then they take it back to the household. This activity usually continues until the small children then go to school, and then they have to ford the river, so then there's a certain amount of fording taking place. Then around about 9 o'clock you usually get small groups of women coming down with buckets of clothes, and they stay there all day pretty well, back and forth to the house. They don't get a great deal of exposure. They usually stand in the water with just up to their feet and their hands, but they usually bring small children with them who play around in the water. Now, this really constitutes the major part of the exposure, and interestingly enough, the infection rates show a bias toward females as far as the level of infection. So we time these activities. We observed the time they entered the water and the time they left the water. We also took their names and so on, so we could relate the people to an actual household. And in this way, we were able to assess the actual amount of contact. We even tried to assess the amount of physical exposure by working out whether they inserted both hands or both feet. Now, in the weekly cycles, you get some interruptions with the banana industry. The beginning of the week, Mondays, Tuesdays, is quite busy. The Wednesdays and Thursdays, the whole household is involved in carrying bananas to the buying points. And then again on the weekends, the washing and bathing activities increase again. So you get a sort of a weekly pattern.
One of the problems of controlling this disease is the problem of clean water.
Mr. Unrau, our sanitary engineer, was responsible for the preliminary investigations, the design and the installation of all the water supplies which this department is installing in Richmond Valley. He has been in Egypt and Puerto Rico before coming to St. Lucia, and in these areas he had considerable experience with schistosomiasis.
And it was with this in mind that we've come down here and tried to design small, simple, and inexpensive water systems to serve the rural people. The people in this area, as well as the school generally, require the crossing of the certain places in the valley, and we've studied the places that seem to be popular crossing points. At these points, we are planning and have started to construct some footbridges that will aid the people in keeping out of the stream. It's very early to tell, but it seems that it will be quite effective if we can find the crossing points that are the most popular. Richmond Valley was selected as the area to try this. It was a natural spot in the fact that there was some natural clustering of houses in this particular valley, and it made the designing problems somewhat simpler than if you had houses scattered throughout the valley floor. During the construction of the water systems, we've been able to utilize some of the local women in helping us carry material to the construction sites. We do hire these people and we pay them what they normally get for a day's work. This has helped in forming a rapport with the people in the community. We hope that this will instill some sense of pride in the system itself, and that they will feel like it partly belongs to them when it is completed and in use. At the intake point, we have constructed a very low, small dam. It's almost a natural dam, and taken the water from this through a pipe into a grid chamber where any sediment that may be in the waters will settle out, and from here it goes into a suction well where the pump will pick it up and then transfer it into the large storage tank on the top of the hill. In the first instance, for the first small village, the capacity is 22,500 gallons. And in the second instance, there's a 40,000 gallon tank which serves a larger community. This will give us plenty of reservoir capacity for an estimated increase in population, as well as some increase due to people moving into the area because of the water service being available. We have designed the whole system to make use of a limited flow device called a Fordilla. This faucet will provide all the water that is required, but requires reactivating after a certain limited amount of flow has passed through the valve. Another modification that we've been able to work out on these has been by adding a threaded outlet and a T, we can place a shower head on the end of the pipe, and there's always a very common attraction between children and water. And in order to prevent the children from going into the streams, we decided that we would try to fill in some of this need that the children have for water play by constructing swimming pools. We've been able to secure some small, simple polyethylene washing machines that can be hand-operated and don't require any power to operate. This would be another reason for the people not to need to go to the stream to do their washing, and since we have put water at their doorstep, we think that they will find these quite convenient to use. We've also constructed a small laundry unit in order to provide facilities for people who wish to use them.
I'm washing.
You're washing? Where are you washing? Where were you washing before?
In the river.
You're washing in the river?
Yes.
And you used to go from your house to the river every day and take your clothes?
Yes.
Well, where do you wash now?
In the laundry.
Are you washing in the laundry?
Yes, I'm washing in the laundry.
And you have a pipe. You're using a pipe for other things too, are you?
Yes, I'm washing.
Now, when the people were digging the pipes, did you help them?
No.
You didn't help them?
No.
Why? Why didn't you help them?
I don't get it.
Oh, you didn't think you would get it, and you didn't want to help the people dig the pot. But are you pleased you've got the water in now?
Yes, yes,
Are you going to use the swimming pool too?
yes.
You are. Do you think you have bilharzia?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? What about your children? Have any of you been to the hospital?
No,
None of you been to the hospital. I see. And what do you do when you cover? You cover a hole or dig a hole? And do you think this might give people bilharzia if you do that?
Yes, it gives them bilharzia if they caca on the beach.
Oh, I see. This community has a very high infection rate. Many of the children obviously have enlarged bellies, they have enlarged livers and spleens, and these children are obviously suffering from schistosomiasis.
In both areas where we're carrying out control, surveys to find out the present status of schistosomiasis in the population are very important. These surveys are carried out by a team of local St. Lucians going from house to house, making a note of the names of each person living in the house, the age and the sex of the person, and collecting a specimen of their stool. In the initial surveys, we visited something like 3,000 houses and collected stool specimens from over 12,000 people. The results of these examinations show that in both valleys, something like 60% of the children are infected. The stools are returned to the lab where the data on each person providing a stool is carefully recorded in a notebook. The stools are then processed and a small quantity of the stool is examined under the microscope. Children at various schools in the island are cooperating with us in some of our investigations. One of these involves the evaluation of a test for bilharzia using blood taken by a finger prick, taking the blood up onto filter paper and returning this to the laboratory where it is then processed. Children have been examined to find out how many have large livers or large spleens. Any found with these conditions are referred to the clinic at the research laboratory where they may be treated, or they may be admitted to the research ward for investigation and treatment.
Now, has this child been treated by us? Yes. And is she any better? Yes, but not too bad. But she's still crying with the belly. The belly is still painful? Yes. Well, she will come little by little. Yes, patient and follow up our clinic and do exactly what Dr. Cook says. Yes, thank you very much.
Was there any blood in the diarrhea?
Yes.
A little bit?
Yes.
Or was there a lot?
Dr. Cook is our physician from North Carolina. He is in charge of the medical investigations being carried out in the clinic and in the research ward.
In the ward, we've been involved with primarily drug trials, trying new drugs for schistosomiasis. And Eudes here, who's only 13, represents a stage of the disease in its more chronic form. I've outlined on his abdomen here his liver and spleen. The eggs are passed out primarily in the feces. However, about half of them are swept into the portal bloodstream, and most come to lodge in the liver. For some reason, in Schistosoma mansoni infections, the left lobe of the liver is enlarged first, and you can see this outlined here. This liver is hard and much larger than it should be. The right lobe of the liver is only slightly enlarged. As a result of this liver fibrosis, portal hypertension occurs, and the spleen is enlarged as well. In cases that we have treated here, we've been able to show a decrease in the size of both the liver and the spleen. This is not to say that in the natural history of the disease there might not be a decrease in the size of these organs. There is epidemiologic evidence to show that there is spontaneous regression in organ size.
If we can hardly compete to staff our institutions and our public...
Mr. Hunter Francois is the Minister of Health and Education in the island of St. Lucia.
So that it has meant a good deal to St. Lucia that the Rockefeller Foundation should have decided to do this project of bilharzia research here. We're very grateful for this, and we were all very impressed at the speed with which they got down to the job.
But if to me you will listen, I shall tell you my story sad, how drinking rum and gambling hall had stolen away my debt. For through the world I wander, and they drive me from the door. Some days I'll find a welcome